Hi, everybody. Welcome to the, what is it, October 2023 SJAA Imaging Special Interest Group meeting. And tonight we got Stephanie Anderson. She's the co-owner of Cloudbreak Optics in Seattle, and she's going to tell us all about harmonic drives. So take it away, Stephanie. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, let me share my screen here. Share and start the presentation. Okay, does that show up all right for you? Hi.
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great. All right, so hi everybody. As Hi said, I am one of the owners of Cloudbreak Optics in Seattle, and I have been in the astronomy world for a long time. I started basically when I was in college and got interested in telescopes, and I was able to work at a small telescope shop in Denver, Colorado. And I worked there all the way through college and even kept the job part-time once I got out into the real world, job-wise. And after moving to Seattle and getting into astrophotography, I realized that there wasn't a good source of astrophotography gear in our area up in the Pacific Northwest. So my business partner, Matt, and I, Matt's also from Colorado, we started our own shop back in 2015. So it was honestly getting deeply addicted to astrophotography. That was the impetus for us starting the business. And so I've been able, fortunately, my background, my degree is in math and physics. So I've been able to apply a lot of that to some of these cool new technologies that are coming out. And the thing that I'm most excited about right now are the harmonic mounts, you may have heard of, or strain wave mounts. And I first heard about these back in 2015, although, or no, I think it might have been more like 2017. But they'd been around a bit longer than that, but this was the first time that they were actually affordable. And I went to NEAF, I saw them on display, saw how small, lightweight they were, and I picked one up for myself. And I've sort of just been kind of specializing in them ever since. And I just wanted to give you a taste of what's out there on the market and how the technology works, and then give you some guidelines for how to use the technology best, because these mounts do work a little bit differently than a traditional telescope mount. So yes, these mounts don't require counterweights, although most of them are designed to be able to add a counterweight if you want to increase the payload capacity. All of the figures that I give in this talk are based on not using a counterweight. But you can expect that if you add a counterweight, you might be able to add perhaps 10 more pounds to the payload capacity. My reasoning for not including that so much in this talk is that one of the real strengths of these mounts is that they don't require the counterweights. That's the whole point of having them. So it seems like adding one onto it sort of works against that kind of that purpose. Because they don't have the counterweight shaft to screw on and the counterweights and the balancing and all of that stuff, these are actually a lot faster to set up. Some of them even have some fairly clever cable management going through the mount, as this one does here. This is from Pegasus, their Nix mount. And of course, these are much lighter to transport. And this is the Nix mount again, the Pegasus one, which is one of the beefier ones that's on the market right now. And this is supporting a C11 with a whole bunch of astrophotography gear. So it looks like they have a no-shift focuser on there, looks like a filter wheel, camera, the off-axis guider, maybe a computer, and some cable management stuff up top. So fully loaded C11, and this Nix mount will throw that around without any trouble. No counterweight there. And this is a smaller one. This is actually the one that I first purchased. This is the RST-135 from Rainbow Astro. So this one's been around longer than most of the ones on the market, although there's another brand called Hobem, which I'm not as familiar with. I don't include it in this talk, but their Crux mount has been around for quite a while, and I know it is fairly popular in California, so some of you may have seen these before. These two companies, Rainbow and Hobem, are Korean companies. And we're definitely some of the early ones to have these on the market. This one weighs 7 pounds. That was what really attracted me to it. And this one I can take on the airplane, no problem, with a telescope and a camera and all of the gear. The backlash in a mount like this is essentially non-existent. You may see a little bit of subtle backlash if the mount uses a belt drive to link the strain wave gear with the motor drive. And so you might see a little bit of give there, but generally belt drives don't have a lot of backlash either. So this is a great system. If you're feeling the pain from backlash, you'll really like this. Most of the models that are out there, in fact, I think all of them that I know of, well, okay, there are a couple that can't be used as equatorial, but all of them can be used as alpha azimuth mounts. And most of them can also be used as equatorial. And we'll talk about the pros and cons of that in just a moment. And I just wanted to go into the technology a little bit because it's kind of neat. The whole point of a strain wave gear is it's a way to provide a high gear reduction in an extremely small package. And in fact, these punch way above their size in terms of gear reduction. Nothing else comes even remotely close to how much torque this can produce. So some of the trade names that are out there are Harmonic drive, Nidec Shimpo, and Leader drive. I think it's very interesting. Harmonic drive, I don't know of any of the current offerings in the astronomy market that are made with the harmonic drive, but that's what they get called, or harmonic mounts, which is kind of interesting. And I think it comes from their trade name. Nidec, so these first two, harmonic drive and Nidec Shimpo, are Japanese manufacturers, and Leader drive is the Chinese manufacturer. And there's recently been a huge push within China to be able to manufacture more of their own robotics without relying on the Japanese gears and components and stuff like that. So Leader drive has really come along, and I think that is a good reason why some of these have come down a lot in price, is that these Chinese gears are pretty decent now, and they're available at a reasonable cost. So it consists of 3 parts, and we'll look at these a little bit more closely on the next few slides. So there's a part called the wave generator, which gets inserted into a gear called a flex spline. And basically this is just press fit into this cup. And then this cup is then driven by a motor. And then this whole assembly is put into a circular spline, which will be connected to the thing that you want to move with the motor. And this is how they work. So this is a look at the wave generator from above, and you can see that it's elliptical, and we'll see why that's important in just a minute. And then that gets put into the flex spline, and the edges of this cup right here are a thin and fairly flexible metal. And then the base of it is a very sturdy mounting point. And then the circular spline, which is the other half of the gear, has 2 more teeth than the flex spline. And how will that all work? So this is what it looks like when it's operating. And what happens is this elliptical wave generator is sort of deforming that inner flex spline. And as it does that, the flex spline walks forward in that outer spline ring. So you can see how you can have a fast moving motor in the center and then basically a huge reduction on the other half of the gear. Any questions on that so far? Okay, just want to make sure I wasn't mowing through this too fast.
Quick question.
Sure.
If you had to quantify the reduction, how much of a reduction would you say it was?
So a lot of the brands advertise about 100-to-1 reduction.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, and these types of gears can usually achieve like 30 times the reduction that another form of gear system can do in the same size package. So it's really got a big advantage there. And so this is actually a little video produced by Harmonic Drive. I took the fancy industrial video music off of here so I can just talk over it while they kind of go through this with us. But I just wanted you to see how the parts work there's the wave generator, the flex spline, the circular spline, and they kind of show this in motion with the ball bearing here. So you can see, okay, it's kind of making this wiggling motion, and then that gets press fit into the cup. So you get to see that here in just a second. Show us from all the angles. Okay, and so here this goes into the, oh yeah, okay, sorry. I forgot what order this goes in. But anyway, so yeah, a close-up look. This is the circular spline with the 2 extra teeth. And into the cup here. And it'll show how that deforms it as the motor spins that elliptical bearing there. And then how it walks forward. Actually, it walks in the opposite direction, by the way, that the motor spins. So it gives you a reduction, and it also changes the direction, which I think is kind of interesting. And that's how that works. And this is the little 7-pound model throwing around. This is a 210 millimeter Takahashi, one of their Mulons. And you can see that just this little 7-pound mount on a regular camera tripod, although it's a sturdy carbon fiber tripod, but it throws around this fairly big telescope, no problem. I have found in practice, the payloads that the companies quote for the strain wave mounts are quite accurate. And some of them go so far as to even tell you how far away your payload can be from sort of like the center of the mount. So if your payload is sitting up too high on the saddle, it will tolerate not as much payload if you do it that way, because you have this moment arm that is pulling on the mount. And so companies like ZWO even kind of give you measurements. If you keep your telescope under this size, you can go up to a certain payload. And like I say, you can always increase this by putting a counterweight on. Most of them have a little port. There's one right on the bottom behind this cord. There's a little screw that you can remove, and you can put basically a Takahashi counterweight bar right on there, and it'll take Takahashi weights in this case.
Maybe you'll get to this in a bit, but I know that ZWO says that they don't recommend their mount on longer than 900 millimeter focal length. And they're not talking about the telescope being that long, but that even, say, a Schmidt with a 2000 millimeter focal length, as your typical 8-inch Schmidt has, would be too long for it. Although the guiding accuracy that people get from it is is often down to half a second, so that would be fine for that telescope. So why is it you think they're telling people we're no good for more than 900 millimeters?
I will get into that in a little bit more, but the answer is that it really does come down to the fact that they don't think that it is tracking well enough to give you as good a performance as that you might get with a more traditional mount on it. And I'll get into some suggestions for that. I believe that you can get pretty good performance, but I would recommend that you use an encoder version, and I'll get into why that is in just a little bit. But that's a really good point. Is honestly, for the best use of these mounts, I wouldn't necessarily recommend going with a Schmidt Cassegrain or something with an extremely long focal length. I think medium to short refractors are perfect for strain wave mounts. And they really fit the bill of being very nicely transportable as well. You know, it's easier to take a refractor on an airline, I think. So, but just my opinion. The traditional gears in a telescope you usually see a worm gear, which looks a lot like this, although normally in telescope mounts, the worm wheel is much larger. And then this worm up here that turns the worm wheel is usually connected to the motor via some spur gears. So there's some additional gear reduction that happens via spur gears. So you have a combination of worm gears and spur gears, and that system is much, much larger than what you would see with a strain wave gear. But one of the cool things about a worm gear system is that the worm can easily turn the worm wheel, but the worm wheel cannot easily or at all turn the worm. The angle on the worm is so shallow that when the gear tries to spin it, the friction between the two gears holds the worm in place. So this is actually unique in gears, and there are a lot of different types of gears. It's not limited to just spur gears, worm gears, and strain wave gears. But of all the gears in the gear world, this is the only gear that has that property, is that you can drive the gear, but the gear can't drive you. And that comes in handy if you have, I don't know, say an out of balance payload, like you would with a telescope mount that doesn't use counterweights. You will by default have a big mass on one side of the mount and nothing on the other side to counterbalance it. And so in this situation, you have a scenario where the mass on the mount can actually backdrive the gear. And this is a feature that's kind of freaks people out about strain wave gears. This is mine with my telescope here at the house. And I have a little video of it, what happens when I remove the power plug. It's massively out of balance. And you can see it just starts to move on its own. Fortunately, it's not fast. And if it hits anything, like if it hits the pier or the tripod leg or something like that, it'll just stop without doing any damage to the telescope. But boy, will this freak you out the first time that you see it. So all of the mounts, except for the two smaller rainbow mounts, have a brake that will prevent this from happening. And it turns out with the smaller rainbow mount, they couldn't fit it into the design of the scope. So in order to make this as small and as light as possible, that there's no brake. And that's just something you have to live with this particular scope. There's no, or this mount, I mean, there's no way for them to redesign it to include a brake without making the whole mount bigger.
So Stephanie,
Okay.
you can't park,
Yeah.
it means you can't park it?
Yes, you can park it. The position that it's in right there is essentially the parking position. It's default parking position. And so the cool thing about this is it is actually pretty easy to balance it in declination. You don't need a counterweight to do that. So, you know, for the purposes of this demonstration, I put it way out of balance just so that it would backdrive when I unplugged it. But if you have your declination reasonably balanced, it doesn't even have to be perfect because there is still quite a bit of friction in the system. You won't have any problems with it backdriving.
All right. Oh, so you can pull the plug if you have it close to balance and it'll more or less stay in position. I suppose if you leaned on it, it would move. But
yeah. I mean, that is true. Like if you have the mount, if you have the telescope straight up over the mount, like either if you're pointed at the pole or if you have it in this position, like I have it there, I mean, that's technically an unstable equilibrium. So it should fall to one side or the other if you pull the plug. But because there is some friction in the system, in practice, if it really doesn't fall if you have it roughly balanced. That's a good question. So it turns out also that these strain wave gears work extremely well in applications where you have like a robot with an articulated joint that might be carrying like a pretty heavy payload. And so that's why these get used by robotics companies. That's why they're so popular. And Rainbow Robotics, I think it's Rainbow Robotics is the parent company in Korea, of course, works with these types of drives all the time. And it just turns out that their hobby happens to be astronomy. So they thought, we should make an astronomy mount with this. And so that's kind of the connection, how they got into the market. But it is really a side project for them. They're mostly a robotics company. But they've had them for a long time. They've been doing it for, I don't know, since the early 2010s, I think. So they've been around a while, but it's definitely not their main main site of their business. It turns out that the strain wave gears are fairly pricey. I was just looking around online to see if I could, buy a set, just get a sense of how much they cost. And I found the Chinese leader drives in the size that I think, from the best I can tell, are in one of the sort of medium-sized mounts that are available out there. And they're $650 for one gear, one set, which is all the three parts of the gear together. So I expect that the strain wave gears themselves do probably make up a huge proportion of the bill of materials for the strain wave mounts, which does explain why they're a little more expensive than the mounts that you're used to. And now I'd like to get into periodic error. So this is one of the main drawbacks to this system, is that the periodic error is quite high. And in fact, the ones that are used in the astronomical mounts are probably some of the better strain wave gears that are out there for periodic error. I read at one point, although I couldn't find it when I was trying to, just brush up my talk today, ZWO was saying that they actually kind of cherry pick from leader drive. They have an agreement with the company to make sure that the periodic error hits a certain spec. And for ZWO, that spec is plus or minus 20 arc seconds of periodic error. For those of you who are used to a traditional mount, you're probably, maybe you have 20 arc seconds peak to peak at the worst. Most mounts, like I think a lot of just the standard Ioptron mounts, not the fancy encoder ones, I think they guarantee something around like plus or minus 5 arc seconds of periodic error. So this is considerably larger. This right here, I'm just showing kind of a test that I did with one, just to show what its periodic error looks like. These little jagged spikes here where the star got lost, I think I didn't have my guide scope focused perfectly, so if a little cloud went by, I lost the guide star. But anyway, you can get a sense of how crazy the periodic error is on these. And so one of the things that I recommend doing is, when you get a strain wave mount, is run it for a long time and just look and estimate how steep this curve is at its steepest point. And that'll give you a sense of how much it's drifting in periodic error per second. And that'll help you figure out how quickly you need to guide. The other thing about these is that the periodic error isn't really periodic. It's kind of quasi-periodic. The periodic error changes as the payload shifts. So basically, a traditional mount, you have this repeatable periodic error. It's the same cycle after cycle. So you can train that, you can learn it, and you can play back corrections into the mount so that you can really tame a mount with true periodic error into, having much smaller amplitude errors over time. Strain wave mounts don't really benefit as much from periodic error correction, although some manufacturers do include it. So like ZWO has a periodic error curve pre-programmed into the mount, I believe. But some of the manufacturers don't necessarily recommend it because it's maybe on average, it's the right correction for the mount, but at any given time, it's probably the wrong correction for the mount. That said, and we'll get into this in just a second, if you can guide fast enough, you're still going to get reasonably good performance out of these, like sub-arc second guiding. So I do still recommend, for those of you who use PhD2, there's an algorithm called predictive periodic error, and it is fantastic and it works really well. Even though this isn't a pure periodic error, their algorithm does update over time, so it's perfect for this. The other thing is, as we were discussing just a moment ago, you're going to estimate how quickly you need to take the exposures in order to keep up with the drift due to periodic error. And those exposures are likely to be somewhere in the neighborhood between 0.5 seconds and 1 second, depending on your image scale. So that's really fast guiding. And the downside to that is that you're going to be chasing the seeing. So the primary thing that you see when you're looking at, at the stars on your guide camera, especially if you have a fairly high frame rate, is you're seeing the camera shift from side to side and up and down and all around. Okay, so this is like a tilt tip error. And that is not real. The star obviously isn't moving like that. That's just the atmosphere moving it around. So you don't want to chase that, because by the time you chase it, it's gone somewhere else. And so essentially you're always wrong about where the star is. What works better is if you can do longer exposures, where the star will have the tendency to average out, and then you can just stay fixed on the average star position. And that's usually considered a better way to do guiding, unless you have some sort of really high frequency setup like they do with adaptive optics. So that's the trouble with these, is that you're stuck with this sort of pretty high, but not quite high enough frequency guiding. You're going to be chasing the seeing around. And the best practice to sort of mitigate that is to use a fairly wide field guide scope if you can. And then you can use the multi-star feature in PhD too. And some of the other guide programs have that as well. In a wide field, if you're using multiple stars, the stars will be fairly uncorrelated. So you get a better average of the true position of the frame. Does anybody have any questions about the guiding stuff?
Yeah, I was curious, what's the period of the periodic error?
I think on mine, I measured it around I think it was 4 minutes, 20 seconds.
So a
Or
normal,
no, 420 seconds, I think was mine.
similar to, in the what traditional mount periods would be.
Yeah, in the same ballpark. Yep.
Normally, it's how long it takes the worm gear to turn around, right? And these have worm gears in them too?
No.
Okay. But how long ever it takes that ellipse to turn around?
Yeah, I think it might be how long it takes for the not the ellipse to turn around, but the flex spline inside the circular spline.
So why do you need to guide so quickly again then? Because if the period is that long?
So it's because the amplitude is high. So you might have it changing. Unfortunately, oh no, I do have my x-axis here. So looks like this is 1 minute's worth of guiding from 1415 to 1416. And it looks like we have a change there of a good
30.
A good 30 arc seconds there in a minute's time.
Now, based on what I see in front of me, although maybe it's not like this all the time, but it sounds like the auto guiding program could start to model this. And
yes, it can. And it does do that fairly well. Yes, indeed. What I don't know, so you'll have to at least have a fairly high frame rate to begin with. What I don't know is once it trains, if you'll be able to lengthen your guide exposures. I haven't played around with that very much.
And the second thing that maybe no one has done is you could actually build a model of the telescope on the mount and understand how the weight shifts of the telescope and understand its effects on the period. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that software can do especially today.
Yeah,
anyway,
no, that's not
crazy
crazy
yet, though. So for right now,
yeah,
people are guiding with 1 second or whatever.
Yeah, I do think that something like that could be possible. I haven't played around with what that would entail, but this predictive periodic error predictive periodic algorithm in PhD2, it's available now. Anybody can use it, and it works quite well. I think it was somebody's PhD thesis specifically for predictive auto guiding in astronomy. So
yeah,
but
no.
You're also warning me that if I'm using an OAG, for example, I'm not going to have a big enough field to get around this effect of chasing the sea.
Yes, and that's the thing here, is that if you're using an off-axis guider and you're using multi-star guiding, which you still can do, the problem is that you're using such a small field that the stars are very highly correlated in their motion. And so you're not really getting that averaging effect that you would over a wider field of view. And so that brings me to the encoders. And this is really the advantage of the encoder on this type of mount. So the type of encoder that it is, it's optical, but it's an incremental encoder. It's not an absolute encoder. So for those of you who have 10 micron or astrophysics mounts, those are much larger, much more sophisticated, and much more expensive encoders. These are still really nice, though. The ones in the rainbow mount are Renishaw German encoders, so they are really nice high precision encoders. There's only an encoder on the right ascension. So its purpose in life is to detect that periodic error and control it. And basically, you know, send a signal to the system to fix it, to compensate for it. Generally, so they say that guiding may not be needed if you use that. If you have a good polar alignment and you are, you know, using a focal length that's shorter than maybe say 300 millimeters, they say that you can get away without guiding with this. But to me, that's not really the purpose of the encoder. The main purpose of it is to give you longer guide exposures. You can take 10-second or longer guide exposures if you want to. But if you can get over, say, 4 seconds or 5 seconds, you're going to benefit from that, you know, star position averaging over time, to where you're not chasing the seeing around as much. But yes, they do add quite a bit. I'll show you, I have a chart in just a second. They add typically about $1,200 to $1,500 to the cost of the mount. But I think it's pretty great because you're not chasing the seeing, which I think is the right way to do it. And particularly with long focal length instruments, this may be the only way to get a really good result with it. Something like a Schmidt-Cassegrain. Of course, you know, I just want to say, I say it's the only way to get a good result with a Schmidt-Cassegrain. That's not really true. It's, you know, it's going to give you the best result with a Schmidt-Cassegrain with one of these mounts. But in all honesty, I've seen absolutely beautiful images with, you know, taken with the Schmidt-Cassegrain on one of these mounts just with standard guiding. So, you know, I think it might come down to your taste and how perfectionist you are. But, you know, I really hesitate to tell anybody that they have to spend $1,500 more on their mount just for the encoder, because, you know, it won't be perfect enough. And that's a thing that you can decide for yourself, but I just don't think anybody should be telling you that your system isn't good enough. The Rainbow Astro, so I'm just going to go through some of the different mounts that are on the market here. So this is the first one, the one that I have. They have their RST-135E, which is $38.95. Oh, sorry, I should start with the standard one, which is the one on the left here, is actually $38.95. And then the E is the encoder version. It's identical except for it's black and it costs a lot, $5,500. These are definitely the most expensive per pound of any of these. But really what they've offered is miniaturization and the Japanese harmonic drive. Well, it's actually the other brand, but the Japanese strain wave mount. This is the RST-300, and this will hold a C14. And the mount itself only weighs about 20 pounds, which is crazy. And the larger of their mounts does have a backdrive brake. And then Ioptron has a dizzying array of strain wave based mounts. And the first ones that I'm going to get into are their HAE series. And this is a hybrid mount. This only has a strain wave on the right ascension. And you remember me telling you that it's not actually that hard to balance in declination, because usually you can slide your telescope forward or backward to get nice and balanced. So the thinking here is that you really only need the strain wave on one axis. And what does that save you? Well, not that much money, honestly. This mount is only like, the basic one's only, I think, $100 or $150 cheaper than the one that has strain waves on both axes. So, and maybe a tiny bit of weight, but not really. So I'm not quite sure the purpose of it. However, I can say, having used one of these, I love it. I have actually used the HAE-29 with the encoder because Ioptron has encoders available on all their equatorial mounts. And I think it's fantastic. It's an absolutely wonderful mount. But I don't know, for the price, you might just go strain wave on both axes. The other thing I want to mention about this is all of the Ioptron mounts, is that they have kind of a unique saddle design, and some people like it, some people don't. It requires tools to adjust it from being able to take like the narrow Vixen style rail to the wider D style rail. The tools are all included. In fact, they're hidden somewhere on the mount usually, so that you don't have to go find them. They have like a little pocket that they stick into. The advantage to this system is that it's incredibly lightweight. So they've done everything they can to lighten the weight of the saddle, which I think is good, especially for the smaller mounts, because that's the whole point of these strain wave mounts, in my view, is to reduce weight. Okay, I guess, sorry, I had it backwards. So these were the regular ones. This is the dual strain wave, and these are the hybrid ones. But yes, basically everything I just said about those. Oh, and I should show the one that I do want to point out. This is fairly new. They introduced this one at NEAF this year. The HEM15 is one of the smallest and lightest mounts available on the market, which is pretty cool. So if you're really looking to go light and portable, that's definitely a winner. The numbers on these correspond to how much payload it'll hold. So the HAZ31 holds about 30 pounds, and the HAZ46 holds about 45, 46 pounds. They're alt-azimuth mounts. They can only be used in alt-azimuth mode, but it's really cool because you can configure it so that the saddle is either on the side or you can put it on the top. And there are a couple of reasons why that's good. One is you don't end up with a really awkward payload over to one side of the mount, which sort of can risk having it topple over. And the other cool thing about this is that you can use it with binoculars, which I thought was really neat. It never occurred to me to try to use a go-to mount with binoculars, and I think this might be one of the only ones you can do that with. This one's extremely popular. We've sold probably more of these than any other, is the ZWO. I think partly because it's red and because the price point is very good. And they just recently came out with their smaller mount, the AM3, which has a very similar capacity to the small little Ioptron that I just highlighted. In fact, I think basically they're probably using the exact same strain wave gear in them, but it is a little physically larger. So that's the difference between them. And AM5, same thing, you know, excellently priced. It's has about the same payload capacity as there's an equivalent Ioptron that has this probably the same strain wave gear. But again, the AM5 is actually physically a little bit larger. Pegasus Astro, this one's kind of big. It has, I think, about a 40-ish pound capacity. I can't remember the exact number. We'll see that in just a minute. And here's the comparison. So you can kind of see that you have these going vertically, you have these strata. So we've got this little, you know, there are two tiny mounts down here, which are the Ioptron, the little 15-pound capacity one, and same the ZWO. But the larger circle for the ZWO here shows that the mount is physically larger, but they're about the same price. And then you go up one level. So these are all using about the same size of strain wave gear. These two over here, the more expensive ones, these are going to be the Rainbow Astro. So this is the standard RST-135. This is going to be with an encoder. And you can see that adds about $1,500 to the price. And then same here, you've got these little clusters. These are the three different types of Ioptrons, these blue ones. And then these are the ones that are available with encoders. This is the AM5 from ZWO. And then we go up a tier. So these are the 45-pound capacity ones. So this is going to be the NICs. And Ioptron has 3 or 4 mounts that can do this. And then here are the encoder versions. Again, it adds, I don't know, maybe $1,200 to the price to get the encoder version there. And then same, they have their giant 69-pound capacity mount with and without the encoders. And that's pretty impressive. honestly. I think that mount weighs less than 20 pounds, or about 20 pounds for about a 70-pound capacity, which is crazy. And then way over here, this is the very expensive RST 300 from Rainbow Astro. No encoders on that one, by the way. So that's kind of the landscape, or at least the ones that we carry in our shop. And I know that there are some extras. I was just talking earlier with, I think it was Brad, who was saying that there are some just generic Chinese mounts that are available on the market that are, maybe sounds like 20% or so cheaper than some of even the ZWO mount. So I'll be interested to hear how those work, but I haven't had a chance to see them or test them yet.
I don't know if there's colors not coming through, but I don't see the red or green dots on this chart.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I may have just done a real face plant on the coloration here.
Yeah,
because I changed the transparency. This is the green one right here. So this is the NYX, the Pegasus Astro
okay,
one.
there you go. Now I see some green. Okay.
Yeah, and you can see here it's a little heavier and it's a little more expensive than its brethren in that class right there. And then of the IOPT.
Sorry, go ahead.
What's that?
I was going to say there's another mount I saw which was different again in that it's called the Warp Drive ST17. It's about $2,000, high capacity, and it claims to have a servo rather than a stepper motor driving it, but then otherwise it's strain wave gearing. And people are also reporting some great results with it, but I have not physically seen it.
The Rainbows also use a servo, and I'm not sure which of the other ones do. Some of them may. I'm not sure which are steppers and which are servos, but yeah, that's cool. I expect we'll see a lot more coming out. I think that any of the brands that don't currently have a strain wave mount will probably have one within a year. That's my guess.
You're looking at
because people are buying these. And I just kind of wanted to show my own experience with the travel friendliness of it. So I take them to shows. This was, I think, at AIC, and they're in San Jose. And this is the little pouch that carries the mount, and the accessories go in this pouch. And my telescope can go in this wheeling case, so I can just take the whole thing on the airplane. And then my employee who came with me, this is her rig right here. So tripod, backpack, strain wave mount will go in the backpack. And then they use a Red Cat, actually, which is a nice travel mount. And then I took it to Hawaii. That was pretty easy. Same kind of deal. Just imaged right off the balcony. Texas Star Party. Again, I flew out for Texas. So this is all something that I can manage on the airplane. I just wanted to mention for a moment polar alignment. I think polar alignment, like the optical telescopes, are becoming rarer and rarer these days, and they're certainly no fun to use. And it turns out there's no place for one anyway on these strain wave mounts because the gear itself sort of blocks the view. So a lot of them do have a mounting point for an electronic polar finder. Ioptron has their own. The other popular one is the Polemaster, and that usually either comes with it or is an option for the mounts. The other thing too is that if you have a wide enough field of view, typically around, if you have a 1 degree field of view, you can just polar align right through your camera and telescope. You don't even need a polar alignment scope anymore. For visual use, this is an example of the RST 135 that's just in a red color. And you can see this is actually a Tech 140, by the way, on that little 7-pound mount. And it works. I've actually played with this myself. But if you're in alt-azimuth mode, you end up with this heavy telescope on one side of the mount and nothing on the other side. So you might either consider using a counterweight or a tripod with the wider stance, or you can try using one of those Ioptron mounts that's alt-azimuth only, where you can configure the telescope on top of the mount, something like that. The other thing that's really worth mentioning is if you plan to use the mount visually, some of these don't come with a hand controller, or they come with just sort of a basic hand controller. So the Rainbow does have a full hand controller. as does the iOptron, although they're making it optional on some of the newer mounts. So you can decide if you want the hand controller or not. And it's something you can always add later. ZWO has a little joystick, which I will say is very easy and intuitive to use, but it lacks the ability to it doesn't have its own computer so that you can do like a 3-star alignment and find objects in the sky that way. You would be dependent on either linking it via Wi-Fi to something like Sky Safari to do that, or you'd have to hook it up to your computer to have computer control. And that's the same with the Pegasus. There's no hand controller at all with the Pegasus. You either have to Wi-Fi it to Sky Safari, or you have to hook it up to your computer and control it with Indy or ASCOM. But all of them that I know of are Wi-Fi enabled. Okay, and then just a brief rundown of the advantages between harmonic and conventional. So with the harmonic, it's obviously, as we've been talking about, no counterweights, higher capacity, lightweight, no backlash. And with a conventional mount, the advantages still exist, and they are less expensive, obviously, predictable periodic error, which is something that's much easier to cope with on the guiding front, less of the periodic error, and backdrive is never a problem. And then finally, actually, I don't know if this is my last slide, but it's close to it. Next to last slide, we'll call it. Schmidt-Cassegrains especially, or any long focal length system. But one of the reasons that makes Schmidt-Cassegrains especially problematic is that you almost have to guide with an off-axis guider on a Schmidt-Cassegrain because you have the mirror shift. There are ways of dealing with that. This is an Edge HD system right here. And if you were to put a no shift focuser on the back, you can actually lock the mirror and sort of prevent the mirror shift. And then you would be able to use maybe like a wider field guide scope to do guiding. It still can't be too wide because you need to have enough focal length in order to guide adequately for the long focal length of the Schmidt-Cassegrain. But if you have any kind of mirror flop, you've really got to use an off-axis guider, and you're going to have that narrow field of view. It's also going to, because it's an F10 system or maybe an F7 system if you're using a reducer, you may not have a lot of stars in your field of view. So multi-star guiding is really not going to work great. And as we talked about before, it's, you know, the stars themselves are going to be highly correlated in their movements. So, you know, maybe that's not going to work super well. But anyway, having a half second or a 1 second guide exposure might not yield any usable stars in a system like this. Or you're just going to be stuck chasing the seeing. So I really highly recommend either going with an encoder equipped strain wave mount or using a traditional mount with this style of scope. And then this is the last thing that I want to say about these is that the tripod is a really big part of the telescope living up to its capacity claims. The mounts themselves are designed to attach to any standard camera tripod, but the tripod we found can easily be the weak link instability. And this goes all the way up to, I have a really nice Manfrotto tripod. It's like a video tripod that has stabilizing bars in the middle. I'm pretty sure it's designed to carry a payload of 20 to 30 pounds or more. And we set that up with the Tech 140 on one of these strain wave mounts, as you saw before. And I found that there was just the way that the tripod was made, there's just some twist, flex to it that you could really tell with the Tech 140 with that longer body, the longer refractor. And so even though it was a pretty terrific mount, it really didn't perform as well as we wanted it to. And when we put it on a more rigid, I think just the connectors at the top of it, the carbon fiber mount, were better. It really improved the overall system. And we were completely astounded that a Tech 140 would be fine on this little 7-pound mount. So that's my last word on this, is don't skip on the tripod. And most of these companies have a fairly inexpensive carbon fiber tripod available that works great. This little, all of them basically have a variation of this Chinese made carbon fiber tripod. ZWO calls theirs the TC40. Sorry about that. And some of them are a little taller than the other ones. Some of them have a little stabilizer in the middle, but essentially all of these are great. You can probably pick one up for around $350. So I do recommend that. Okay, so that's all I have for you. Does anybody have any questions on this?
I have a question. Is it in the weight category of I know these mounts can carry like a 15 to like 60, 70 pounds, but in generally like 30 to 40 pound weight capacity. And which mounts do you think are that you have tried? I'm assuming you tried because you're selling them. You tried most of them. Which ones do you think are the most kind of well-made and accurate, or is that a tough question to answer? Is you're selling all
No,
of them?
that's actually a really good question. So the three that I have experience with are the RST-135, the RST-135E, and the Ioptron, their hybrid 27 with the encoder. So those three I've had personal physical experience with. I will report though that we've had nearly universal, good feedback on the ZWO mount. People seem to love it. We've had essentially no problems with it, and we've sold more of those than the other mounts. I think partly that's because ZW has this incredible ecosystem that everybody recognizes. Their stuff tends to look good together, but it also functions very well. So I would recommend that one. I really loved the Ioptron. I very much love the Rainbow. I have not used the Pegasus as much. They did one big production run and they're now on their second production run, so we don't have as many of those out in the wild, but it's a really sharp looking mount, very well built. So I don't really have anything negative to say about any of them, to be honest.
What's your projection for the price curve over time for these? I assume the price is going to go down, but are they fated to always be above conventional mounts because of the bill of materials cost that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, that would be my guess. I don't really have a good sense for how much they might come down. I don't know, as they get more popular, maybe there are some economies of scale. I do know that Rainbow had a previous version of their mount called the RST-150, which was essentially identical to the RST-135, but somehow they managed to shave a lot off the price of it. So I know at some point there was a big step down in price at least in the components for these. But I don't know how much that might continue.
First off, thank you, Stephanie, for the talk and presentation. I've been off astronomy and astrophotography for a few years, so I wasn't aware of this development, so this is really informative, instructive for me. When you showed the animation with the inner ring gear kind of deforming, one of the thoughts I had was, what's the durability, longevity of these? How frequently do they need maintenance? Do we have enough information on that, especially in comparison to traditional mounts?
So the Rainbow mounts have been in the wild. The one that I have has been in the wild for about 6 years, and we have yet to see any that needed maintenance, at least on that front. There have been, things that have gotten dropped, or, usually it's something like the connector breaks off or something like that. But so far, as far as I know, none of the strainwave gears have needed any maintenance. I don't have a good answer for that. I'd like to know that myself, but so far, and the other thing that I think is a bit telling too is that Rainbow has a 5-year warranty on their mount, which is very long compared to other warranties in the industry. Most of them are only, most mounts are only like a 2-year warranty, at least the Chinese ones. So I do think that bodes well, that the company at least thinks that they're going to last longer.
The Rainbow, you said, has the 5-year warranty.
Has a 5-year warranty, yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would differ on your price forecast because of exactly the reason. These these motors or wave gears are being driven by robotics, Robotics is growing. It's going to continue to grow exponentially for many years. Everything else in astrophotography, it's been sort of a sort of semi-stable hobby. You don't have the number of astrophotographers in the world going up by 100-fold, the way you have the number of robots going to go up by 100-fold, and that will drive the price down. As you already said, the Japanese strain wave mounts have now been undercutting price a great deal by the Chinese ones, and now there's competition in China going to be going up to build them. So I would actually anticipate that we should see significant price reductions in these mounts.
That would be great.
I have another question regarding that. Are these, I think if I remember right, the name Strainwave is a trademarked one, right? Are these things patented? Are these inner components, including this drive? I see clear difference between the early adopters of these companies, the Japanese, Korean, and then now there's a lot of companies from China is basically making them for 1/3 or half the price.
So this is a little bit rumor and hearsay, but Harmonic Drive, I think, is the one that's the trade name for one of the Japanese companies. And my understanding is, so the technology itself was invented back in, I think, the 1950s, late 1950s. And in fact, I guess some strainwave gears were used on the wheels of the Apollo, the lunar lander. So they've been around since at least then. My understanding is that one of the Japanese companies, I think it was Harmonic Drive, had a patent on something connected to it, but I don't think it was the strainwave gear itself. And the rumor that I heard was that the patent ended on that, and that sort of opened up the door to a whole bunch of others hitting the market for much cheaper prices, basically. But the other thing that I heard that really drove the prices down was China investing in their own robotics manufacturing capabilities. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, I have one or a couple, really. So say I buy a Rainbow Astro and it breaks on their 5-year warranty. Say I bought it from you. I mean, you're not fixing it, right? So it would have to go to Korea, right?
No, actually, we usually can fix them. And if not, they have another person in the US who can fix them. So they very rarely have to go to Korea.
Okay, so and your mount in for 3 months kind of problems.
Right. And the same is also true. ZWO has a US maintenance facility as well. And Ioptron does too. So they all have tech in the US so that you don't have to wait forever. That was something that we ran into on cameras during the pandemic with both ZWO and QHY, because at certain times during lockdowns in China, it became impossible to send goods back and forth. So sometimes it was just, the backlog of DHL getting the cameras back and forth.
Oh.
So
how often are people needing to send their mounts back?
So far, I have not had, I think maybe one of the ZWOs that we've sold had an issue.
Out of hundreds?
Yeah. And nothing so far on Ioptron, but we haven't sold as many in fairness. The Nixes had an early software issue that they were able to basically fix everybody's mounts remotely through firmware. So that one wasn't a big deal. And we haven't had any major mechanical issues with the Pegasus at all. The Rainbows have been around longer. So I have had to replace some boards in the Rainbow mounts. I've also had some that have had just more physical damage to them, like they've been dropped or knocked over or something like that. So we've had a few of those that have had to be fixed. Except for in some fairly extreme cases, Rainbow's just covered everything. And because the mount's only been around just slightly over 5 years, they haven't even really been checking anything with the warranty. They've just been covering it. They keep telling us like at some point they'll have to get serious about making sure that your telescope, your mount would still be under warranty. But for the moment, they're just taking care of all the problems as they arise.
Would they cover rats eating my mount? I'm asking for
Probably not, but I would be a little bit surprised if a rat could do any damage to a Rainbow mount.
It could mess with the cables, but not the mount.
Yeah, externally, I would think. Yeah.
I guess those who weren't here earlier will not understand this joke.
Another, I just greased my mount a few months ago, not a harmonic drive mount. So you don't think you need to do that kind of maintenance with them?
Well, it's a more closed gear system.
Okay.
So no, I don't think so. But I kind of want to know. I want to ask the manufacturers what they think. There's nothing in their manuals that would suggest that you need to, though.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Are there other questions?
Well, I could get into one just very direct, since the two mounts I'm looking at the most are ZWO's AM5 and AM3. As you say, a lot of other people are looking at those mounts in particular. So the AM3 has a few advantages. It speaks Bluetooth and a few other things just because it's a bit newer. So it's got slightly better electronics, and it's lighter, but it's limited to 8 kilograms without the counterweight. And I would be often right at that limit. Or would you say, if I am right at that limit, don't push it and get the heavier duty mount?
I think it comes down to is your purpose to be extremely portable? In which case, yes, I would probably try to shave weight off as much as I could in every way I could. Otherwise, if you just get the AM5, it's a little bigger. It'll give you a little more padding for future proof, for whatever else you might want to do with the mount down the line.
Actually,
But that's
sorry, I was gonna add on something because I do have the M5 for most of this year. I was going to buy the Rainbow Astro $5,000 mount, but it was twice the price. So I got this thing. I'm really happy about it. But one thing I want to add on to your comment is I believe the M3 and M5 they are fairly close, 8 pound versus 12 pounds. But I think the form factor might be something that might be a little surprising, because I was thinking a 12-pound mount would be a lot more compact. But the M5, in my mind, I have had several mounts that it takes a little bit of space.
Mm-hmm.
So that might be a factor rather than just a few pounds.
Yes, if you look at all the ones that are in its sort of capacity and size range, the ZWO is definitely the largest of the ones that have that capacity. But it's also a little bit less expensive.
Okay, last chance for questions before we call it a night. All right, well then, Stephanie, thank you so much for that talk. That was really helpful and informative and well done. Could everybody unmute and give Stephanie a big hand, and we'll see everyone next month.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you. Guys, Stephanie.
All right. Good night.
Everyone.